Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 621 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today, you have the great pleasure of listening to me speak with Kelsey. She's an adult who's been living with type 1 diabetes for quite some time, and she has a passion for helping people with type 1. When this was recorded, Kelsey was the Community Relations Coordinator for the Chris Dudley Foundation. She since has moved on to be the Director of Operations at Gales Creek Camp Foundation. Kelsey likes helping people with type 1 diabetes, and she loves Diabetes Camp. I think she might have even well, you'll find out. I'm not going to spoil it all here. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you're a United States resident who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver of someone with type 1, please do me a favor and go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and join the T1D Exchange Registry. Taking the survey only lasts a few minutes. You can do it from your phone. It's super simple to do. Hold on, I gotta wait for the music. It's completely HIPAA compliant, 1,000,000% anonymous, and it's gonna help people living with type 1 diabetes and benefit the Juicebox Podcast. I would really appreciate it if you went to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and filled out that survey today. Thank you very much. Just one more thing. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You're on a Mac?
Yes.
You go to the Apple in the top left corner of the screen.
Uh-huh.
Go to System Preferences.
Uh-huh.
Sound. Bottom middle.
Sound, bottom middle.
Ish.
Oh, there it is.
Then the sound effects tab.
Uh-huh.
Midway down, it says play sound effect through, and there's alert volume slider. Slide it all the way to the left.
Okay.
Don't close that, because after you're done, you're going to want to remember to slide it back to where it was and close your system preferences. So you will hear it the next time you get an email, but we're not going to hear it again for the next hour.
Okay. It says there's one checked that says play user interface sound effects.
Yep.
Should that still be checked?
Yeah, it's just the slider. You're just basically turning the volume down, and then you won't get those notifications. I mean, you'll still get them. You just won't be able to hear them.
Okay.
You
gotcha.
Slide it back when you're finished and quit the preferences, and you're right back where you started.
Awesome.
Okay. I'm just afraid if you close the preferences now,
then I'll forget.
yeah, like hours from now, you'll be like, I have 300 emails. I didn't hear one of them. What happened? But that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're ready, and I know you're probably not nervous, or are you nervous?
No.
Okay. I don't think you should be.
It helps that we've talked before.
Yeah. Well, that was what I was thinking too. But just introduce yourself and we'll start going.
Awesome. Well, my name is Kelsey Duman, and I have had type 1 for, 22 years now. And I work with diabetes camps and kids and teens and families with type 1. And I am a big fan of the Juicebox Podcast, so I'm excited to be here today.
Well, then I feel badly starting off in a way that could be taken as creepy. But if you've had diabetes for 22 years and I'm looking at this photo of you, are you 24? Like, what's going on?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. No, I'm actually 29.
No, please.
So I was diagnosed when I was 7.
7. Gotcha. Okay. So you said a second ago, which I'll just leave in so people have context, that you're not nervous because we've spoken to each other before.
Yes.
So what came first, the Chris Dudley or the egg? Did you book him before yourself or yourself before him?
I booked him. Well, it was kind of at the same time, actually. I had reached out to Scott to see about being on the podcast and if it was something that, if there was some little nuggets of info that the listeners would be interested to hear from me. And one thing led to another, and I brought up the podcast to Chris and he was excited to join as well. So,
okay. So Chris's episode is all edited and it's in the queue.
Yay.
It's going to be up very soon. Maybe next week.
Awesome. Nice. That's awesome.
And then somebody will hear this 6 months from now and go back and look for it. Like it's the second, like it just happened. But
right.
Yeah, this would have been back in June. You just did something that captured my imagination. You said, I reached out to Scott. Do I feel different to you talking to you than the entity that you believe you're emailing? Or is that just a misstep of words?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I was like, oh, maybe I'm multiple people to multiple people. Maybe you guys.
I mean, it's so funny with podcasts being such, a phenomena right now. You imagine someone when you hear their voice, right? And then you get to talk to them more in person, or we had talked over Zoom and you're like, oh, wow, there's like a person behind the voice.
Yeah. I don't seem that much different, like when I'm not being recorded, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I am, but wouldn't this have been an odd time if you'd been like, oh, no, absolutely, you're kind of a prick. And I didn't even know. I was like, oh, I am?
Yeah. Truth hurts. No,
yeah, right? I'd be like, oh, no, I'm going to have to take that in. Well, okay, so you diagnosed when you were 7, you said?
Yes.
Wow, that's pretty young. Any in the family, diabetes-wise?
No. It's crazy. My entire life, I've been told, there was no family history, yada, yada. And then just like a year ago, my dad was like, well, I think maybe my great aunt once removed had it. I was like, what? Where is this coming from?
Who's a great aunt? I don't even know how to track that.
I know, me neither. I was like, does that truly count as genetic connection? So maybe, I guess, is the answer, but not that I really know of.
So basically, his sad third cousin who couldn't get a date one Thanksgiving that he met
right.
Yeah, in the 70s.
Exactly. Well, but yeah, I have 2 brothers and they both don't have it. Neither are my parents. So
I just thought of a question I don't think I've ever asked before. So what does it feel like does that feel separating that you're the only one?
Not for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
My dad and my mom both were super involved in different ways growing up with type 1. And I think it almost made it more of a family affair, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't feel separating from my family. My mom was really hands-on with the management part of things. She had carb counts memorized on every single thing. And then my dad was super good about working with me on advocacy stuff. We went to the JDRF Children's Congress when I was 11 and got to go talk to our nation's leaders about funding diabetes research. And so he was really formative in kind of how I've accepted having type 1. So I think they really made it more of a positive and something that they saw as just something that helps shape our family. And so it never felt like I was just out on my own island.
Right. Empowering even?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What did management look like 22 years ago? Did you start regular NPH?
I did start regular NPH.
Right.
Quickly changed though. I got on a pump when I was 10. So by the time I really can recall management, I was on a pump. I do remember the one time my mom mixed up my regular and NPH, and we were just like, what do we do? You can't mix them up. She did the wrong dose of one. And I think I remember that because there was so much panic in that moment. But yeah, by the time I could really remember, and by the time I really took some ownership of it, I had the old school Animus pump that was the size of a brick. And obviously no CGMs. It was all testing. I always think back of my least favorite part of growing up with diabetes was the logbook. And you had to write down your blood sugar every time you tested and record your exercise. And oh my gosh, killed me.
Again, I think the podcast exists partially because I didn't want to do stuff like that. And I thought if I could really figure it out, I wouldn't have to write anything down and tell anybody about it ever again. This ownership of diabetes, when did that transition begin for you? Do you recall?
Yeah. I talk with parents about this a lot at camp sessions, because that's a huge question, right? Like, when do you let your kid take some ownership? How do you do that? What if they don't want to? And I feel like for me, it was kind of a slow burn, if you will. I think once I was on a pump, my mom was really good about giving me those little nuggets of ownership. Even as far as like, okay, here's what your carbs are. Here's how much insulin you should take. You put it in the pump. I'll double check it just in case, because you're 10, but you put it in the pump and you press the go button. And so just those little bits of building blocks. I would say high school was definitely when I started to take more of a lead role in my management. And I always think back, my parents, when you're, having a daughter with type 1, when you're in middle school and you're getting invited to sleepovers, and the parents are like, okay, well, how do we manage this? Especially back then when there was no Dexcom share, I didn't have a cell phone type of a thing. And so their rule was, you can go to whatever sleepover you want when you can prove that you can wake up in the middle of the night and test your blood sugar to make sure you're still good to go.
So they put it on you a little bit.
Yeah. And it was, I felt like that was fair, because if, that's what I needed to do to be responsible enough to take this next step of going away on sleepovers. And it took me a little while to wake up and not just turn off the alarm and roll over, but to actually wake up and test, and yell down the hall that I was 150, I
think that's
that's
insightful and important to talk about, actually, that you can't just make an ask of a kid and expect that, by next Thursday, it's all going to be buttoned up and going the way you want it to. Like, it could take weeks or months of you turning off that alarm and being like, oh, I can't do this. And until you find your rhythm with it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. And they had good compromises. It wasn't like, oh, you can't go hang out with your friends because you can't do this because you have diabetes.
Gvoke HypoPen has no visible needle and is the first pre-mixed auto-injector of glucagon for very low blood sugar in adults and kids with diabetes, ages 2 and above. Not only is Gvoke HypoPen simple to administer, but it's simple to learn more about. All you have to do is go to gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with insulinoma or pheochromocytoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. I don't do this often, but I saw a post on my Facebook page the other day. By the way, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes, private Facebook group, 20,000 members, go join. There was a post about the T1D exchange. It said, if you're not on the T1D exchange, you like making some extra money every now and then, and you love contributing to type 1 diabetes research, go join. This person says, I've done 3 studies in the last 6 months, currently being paid to upload a couple of pictures every day and take a survey for 16 days. Easy peasy, and it's for the greater good of T1D tech. I'm sure Scott has a direct link, so you can benefit the podcast as well. Well, she's 100% right, I do. T1dexchange.org/juicebox. When I tell you about the T1D exchange, I never bring this part up because it doesn't come to fruition for everyone, but it is a sincere possibility that the T1D exchange may offer you other opportunities after you take the survey. So you have to be a type 1 who's from the United States or the caregiver of a type 1 from the United States. You have to go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox, fill out the survey, takes less than 10 minutes. It's HIPAA compliant and anonymous. And then you're in. They'll follow up with more stuff if there's opportunities available. And if not, you've done a great thing. You're helping people with type 1. You're helping the show. So just taking the survey is a big help. but there may be more. Anyway, I don't usually talk about it like that because I just want you guys to do it because you want to do it. But I see people are excited about it. There's a lot of comments in this thing about other people who have done it. And I just thought maybe I should tell you. T1dexchange.org/juicebox. Go fill out the survey. Yeah, they didn't lock you in a dungeon if you couldn't do it, right?
Right. Like I could go spend the night at my cousin's house because my aunt was trained in everything. Mm-hmm. But it just seemed like it made sense, even at 12, 13, that if I wanted to go off on my own, I had to learn to do this stuff on my own.
Did you wake up every night to test your blood sugar?
So my parents in the beginning woke up, I think, almost every night at 12 and 3.
Yeah.
They kind of found their own rhythm. I think because I started waking up so early to test myself in the middle of the night, it became almost this like habit. And I actually, when I was like 17 or 18, my endocrinologist sat me down and was like, you can sleep through the night. It's going to be okay. But it almost became this anxiety of like, well, I have to wake up at 12 and test and see what I am. And,
right.
I had an amazing endocrinologist growing up, and she was like almost giving me permission to, as long as you're at a good range before you go to sleep, you got to trust your body.
Describe that a little bit. If you were to get up every night at midnight and test and always have a good number, like, good meaning you felt comfortable about it.
Right.
What would stop you the next night from not getting up? Is it just like, this is going to be the day?
Yeah. Honestly, I think I really needed that almost permission from my doctor. Okay. Because my mom had said, you're not getting enough sleep. You're also a teenager, right? Like, so it's like, your body's growing. You have to get more sleep than you have been getting. Mm-hmm. And it was really tough, honestly, to let myself trust my body and trust the basal rates that we've, mm-hmm. looked over and over. So
yeah, I agree. I was wondering how it struck you. So yeah. How do you, we kind of glossed over it a little bit. So do you work at a lot of different camps, or do you work specifically for the Chris Dudley Foundation?
So right now my full-time job is with the Chris Dudley Foundation. But I love being involved with as many diabetes camps as possible. I actually got my undergrad degree in psychology and camp management. Mm-hmm. So it was super fun to be able to apply some of my education to it. And then right now I'm getting my master's in nonprofit management, which, as any camp lover would know, many of them are nonprofits. Yeah. But I work really, really closely with another diabetes camp here in Oregon called Gales Creek Camp. And they host 9 camp sessions all throughout the summer. And then I've worked closely with Riding on Insulin, which is a ski and snowboard camp for kids with type 1. Mm-hmm. And then I work a lot with the Diabetes Camping and Education Association, which is kind of the hub of all the diabetes camps.
So what's in your mind, what's the goal of diabetes camp for the attendee?
For the attendee, the goal of diabetes camp is, and this is broadly speaking, right? Because a lot of them focus on different aspects, but giving kids the tools and the self-confidence to not only live well with type 1, but really embrace type 1 and use the skills that it brings into your life to take them further in other aspects of their life.
Okay. I have to just take a detour for a second. I love your generation because you have, I think 3 times in the first 16 minutes that we've spoken, made sure not to generalize in your answer. You'll say, well, in my, experience, or for me, or in this set. It's very, you guys don't generalize. Like, older people are just like, if you ask me a question, I will answer it empirically as if it is the only answer in the whole world. And I know that's not like particularly right. And I do try, I think I'm doing a better job of not answering that way and talking like that as I get older. But you guys are so aware of it. Like, it's nice. I don't know another way to put it, really. But I hear it every time. Like, it hits me.
Oh, interesting.
Like a little tap on the back of my head, like, oh, she was really careful there not to generalize. anyway.
Well, and I'm sure you've noticed this, talking to all of these different people with type 1 who work in type 1, like everyone's journey is so different with type 1. You can generalize in the sense of we all wear a pump or we all take insulin, but I mean, everybody has their own experiences and their own outlook on life with type 1.
No, absolutely. I don't think you're wrong in the least bit. I think you're 1,000,000% right. I'm just so aware of it when it happens, which makes me think back to when I was younger. We must have just blurted out the first thing that occurred to us. And that was the new rule. So,
right.
It's like I don't know. That's interesting. So, okay. So you come to camp, basically. Is there any way in your mind that this podcast is virtual camp?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's so cool growing up. So I started going to camps, diabetes camps, right after I got diagnosed. Gales Creek Camp, who I work closely with, do a family camp. And so I was diagnosed in May when I turned 7, and that July, my family and I were at family camp. And so like I have just grown up through the system, if you will. But as I've gotten older recently, the diabetes online community has just taken off. And it's so cool to see aspects within podcasts or Facebook groups of that diabetes community that when I was younger, it felt like camp was the only place to find that. Yeah. Now in these new formats of support.
Yeah. I think that all the time. I don't ever say it out loud, I guess, that I don't see the difference between all those things you just listed. Yeah, Facebook group,
right?
Listening to this, going to camp. It's the idea of first seeing that there are other people who have diabetes, and there they are right in front of you. They're not weird. Like you're not the only handsome person with type 1, and everybody else is just hunched over in a ball. You know what I mean? Right. Like that feel. You know what I mean? Like that feeling that even you could maybe even feel like, well, those other people are sick, but I'm not.
Right.
And then you see other just completely normal people walking at you, and you see yourself in them, and that's comforting and inclusive. Sure. It makes you feel like surrounded in a good way. And then you hear people's ideas. Now, I've had people come on here and tell me that some of I had somebody on recently talking about an eating disorder, and I don't think the episode's up yet, but the person said that all of the, I'm making air quotes, best eating disorder tips came from camp, because that's where they learned how to manipulate their insulin and everything from other people who were already doing it in a time where, and this was years ago, not that it couldn't happen right today, but years ago when it was harder to like track your data, even like they taught her how to like cheat in her log books or test when they knew they were at a certain number, or use urine strips, but put water on them, and they would come back just reading like normal, like that kind of stuff. And so in my mind, as I'm being told that story, I think it would be easy for people to listen to that and think, well, see, camp's bad. But I just think that in every walk of life, you have the opportunity to take the good or the bad from something. There's always going to be a mixture, right? It's up to you what you're going to take from it. So while that person's recollection was that camp taught me how to do things I wasn't supposed to do, I don't really believe that. I think that there are answers, especially in today's world with the internet, as completely readily available as it is, you could find out anything. Like I could learn anything in the next 5 minutes if I wanted to. So you kind of have to want it, I think.
For sure. And I think, being at camp, you are in a cabin in the middle of the woods, usually with kids your own age who all are experiencing this same thing. And that's what you have in common, right?
Yeah.
So it's crazy. Like some of my best friends are from camp, and they're people that I probably, if I met them on the side of the road, wouldn't have become best friends with them just because we're so different. But you have those shared experiences and the same daily challenges, and you connect on that different level. And so obviously those conversations are going to come up. And like you said, you take what you want from it. So obviously not great that camp was a source of damaging information for her in that sense, but there's also, probably tenfold the amount of good information that kids can take.
Oh, I would imagine.
And And just those tips, I mean, you're talking about the tips of, I'm assuming probably diabulimia.
Yes.
But the tips of, what to do when you're feeling like, diabetes just sucks and I don't want to do this anymore. And, I've had conversations with kids that are struggling with eating disorders, but they feel like there's that safe space where they can talk about it. And whether they're approaching it from this is what I'm doing and I'm not sure if like how I feel about it, or I need help and no one else understands how I'm doing this to myself. And so I need to talk to someone who really understands diabetes to really get this. Yeah. It just creates that almost internal community. And you're out for a week and most of the camps don't allow kids to have their cell phones with them or internet or anything. So you're with the people you're with, and it just creates that open space of just talking through those things.
How do you negotiate that? Because that seems like such a great idea to leave your cell phone at the door, kind of an idea. but how do you even hear comedians talk about it now? Like if you go to see comedy live, there's literally an industry around bagging people's cell phones at live events.
Interesting.
So that your phone stays safe and protected, and they can get it back to you because you can't come into their performance with a cell phone because the comedian doesn't want to be up there thinking you're about to take 4 words that they say and turn it into some, misrepresented or something like that. They want to be free to talk. So I love the idea of those kids coming into the camp, leaving their electronics behind. But how do you do that when their electronics are their insulin pump or their CGM too?
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge concern among parents for sure. But there's, like I said, I work with the Diabetes Education and Camping Association, and they've done a great job of kind of helping camps figure out ways where you don't need your cell phone to access your Dexcom. So, right, if a kid has a t:slim pump, they ask the kid to take the Dexcom off their phone, turn in their phone, and then rely on the Dexcom that's on their pump. I think what you said in the beginning there of how do you negotiate that with like these teenagers who are glued to their phone any other day of the week, and they're showing up at this place where maybe they've never been, and now you're asking them to give up their like safety blanket. And I think sometimes it's a little tough, but I think kids can be more logical than we give them credit for. Mm-hmm. And so when they understand that, like at Chris Dudley basketball camp, we're going to be playing basketball all day. Like the only breaks you're going to get are for meals and snacks and to test your blood sugar if you feel low. Mm-hmm. So they kind of get like, well, okay, I'm going to be busy. I guess I won't have time. I don't want my phone to fall out on the court and break. And actually at Chris Dudley basketball camp, we have them turn it in, kind of like you're talking about with the comedy guys, and put them in a bag, put their name on it. And then it goes in the camp store, and there's an hour period in the afternoon where they have some free time. They can shower, they can go to the pool, and they're allowed to check their phone out just to check in with mom and dad or whatever.
Yeah,
and
that's what
we've noticed.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. But we've noticed that a lot of them just leave their phone there.
Right.
And I think it speaks to how we've built that community and that kind of positive energy of like building connections with the people who you're with, because they are showing us that they'd rather hang out with their new friends than get on their phone and go on Instagram or TikTok or whatever.
No, I mean, that aspect of what you're saying is magical. The idea that they wouldn't have a phone because what does a phone really do, right? It stimulates you in a way that real life almost can't, mm-hmm. And so it feels better. It's more comfortable. It's soothing. It's all the things that talking to a person should be, or mm-hmm. playing basketball or something like that. But I'll use my daughter as an example. If you took Arden's phone from her, she's done. Like she's looping.
Right.
So she can't would you ask her to go on MDI while she was there?
Oh, that's true. Cause you're looping.
Yeah. Like she needs that phone to be near her.
Yeah, that's a great question. What's interesting with the last couple of years of COVID interruptions is we haven't had the chance, at least at Chris Dudley basketball camp, to
have that situation.
Have a looper at camp.
Yeah.
Well, and I know Chris himself loops, and so he's all for it. But because we haven't had camp the last couple of years, we haven't had a chance to see what that would look like.
Right.
And I think honestly, if it was, only up to me, which there's a whole team of medical professionals that would make these decisions, but from kind of a camp director mindset, if you will, obviously if she needs her phone as her pump, she needs it, right? Like that's a non-starter. And so I think it would be a question of, okay, so can you, turn off the data, keep on your Bluetooth. And I looped for a little bit, but it's been a while. And really just whether she has her phone and it's just functioning as the pump and CGM, and it's not she's sitting on her phone talking to her friends, which she doesn't sound like the kind of kid that would do.
Right. Well, that's, what's interesting is we've come so far in society where you can't, like, I imagine a time where you tell the kids, look, you're here, I know you own a phone, but you don't use it. And then they actually listen to you. Like that to me would be the pinnacle of this concept, actually teaching people to integrate this isn't your job at camp, but it would be nice if people could actually understand how to integrate technology into their lives without allowing the technology to take over their life.
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I know other camps, like Gales Creek, who I work closely with, they don't have cell service out there.
Yeah.
So they don't have to do as much as we do with like protecting the phones and putting them in their own little box so that the kids aren't tempted with them. Because it's, if they're looping, great. If they're not, their phone's just kind of an iPod type of a thing. So
Kelsey, I think that was an odd Oregon flex you just did there. You're like, we have cell service where we're at. I just imagine Oregon to be like, countless acres of 300-foot tall trees that are 4 feet from each other and nothing else exists there.
I mean, that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah, you have granola weaved into the dreadlocks under your arms right now. Is that not true?
Right? Exactly.
Yeah, okay, let me make you the king of the world for a second.
Oh, okay.
But we'll keep you in your camp space. What could diabetes camp be that it currently isn't?
Oh gosh. Wow, that's a great question.
Of course it is. That's why the podcast is listened to by many, many people, because I don't ask the silly questions. I want to know, here's what I think when I'm talking to you. I'll give you a chance to think for a second.
Yeah.
I think young, smart, type 1, you married a type 1, which I don't even think we've gotten to yet, right?
True, we haven't.
Right. Eventually you're going to have a baby. It's going to probably come out with an insulin pump on its forehead or something like that. And so what, like, do you dream or like, well, here, in fairness, some people go to work and they like facilitating and doing a job. And some people will live their whole lives doing that. And some people are at work thinking this could be better. This could be like, are you a person who thinks about how to make things better? Or are you taking a lot of joy out of making the machine work?
No, for sure. I definitely am always thinking about, how could we change this? How could we improve or expand, really?
Yeah. Or get more out of it even. Like, make it be something. Maybe there's I always think this about everything. Like, maybe this thing has a purpose that we don't know yet. And like, what could this thing do if it was all together like this? If we like wiped away all the norms that were in our heads and the way we think things are supposed to be, like, what's the opportunity here? We're bringing kids together. They're at camp with operated by a type 1 who was a long-time NBA player. So super exciting. Plus you're in Oregon and you have cell service. Your people are like literally like kings. You know what I mean? Just sitting on your thrones with your cell service. What's there that's right in front of you that you don't see, or that you see but it's hard to get to happen? Like, that's what I want to know. Like, how do you make it more than it is?
So the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure there's so many different routes I could take with my thought process in this. But kids go to camp and then they age out and that's it. Right. And it's interesting because I'm sure, Arden's 17, right?
In a couple days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, happy birthday, Arden.
I will tell her.
But like, you're going to get to that point that I, have gone through as a young person with type 1, where you're transitioning from high school to college and then college to the real world. And there's so much change in that for anyone. But then you add type 1 on top of it, and there's so much to just kind of wrap your head around, psychologically and physically and basal rate wise.
Yeah.
That's a huge transition point for young adults with type 1. And I mean, camp's amazing. And as a kid, it was, at least for me, like a huge amount of support, and really helped me accept type 1 and embrace type 1 and use that to my advantage rather than it being something that hinders me. And then I was lucky enough to be so passionate about camp that I immediately went into being a camp counselor for the whole summer. And so I kind of just fell back into that support because I was working in it.
Yeah.
But there's so many kids who, turn 18, they can't be campers anymore. They maybe don't like have that passion or have the availability to work a camp all summer. And now they're just set free on their own. And I just think that there's such an opportunity there for camp to continue, whether it's an adult camp, which I know some people do host, but just to kind of extend that support, because as a kid, there's so much that stays the same, right? Like from elementary school to high school, so much that changes also, but your biggest changes are right after high school. So I think just finding ways to apply the magic or the science, if you will, of camp to that next step.
Yeah. So a way for young adults to be connected to each other, even if they can't show up in the woods together for a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
Especially when they're now trying to figure out management stuff that's not going to be completely obvious to them at first.
Right.
Right. And you need other people to speak to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
See, I just think that's the key to this whole thing. That not everybody is going to have all the ideas that they need, or, they'll miss one little piece. And how great is it to be able to blurt it out? And I'll tell you what I believe, as the podcast grows, numbers are important. So it's not necessary that everyone speaks. It's necessary that everyone can see it, because if you take 50 people and ask a question, you might not get the answer. If you ask 50,000 people, you're going to have somebody with some lived experience.
And your odds go way up.
It really makes things easier, because then people chime in. I think people are, you're fooled a little bit by social media. There's this idea that everybody that you see talking is everybody that's there.
Right.
But I know, like, the rule of tens exists in a big way.
Right.
You reach 100,000 people to find 10,000 people to do something. Of those 10,000 people, only 1,000 of them will take the next step. Of those 1,000, only 100. It really is true. Most people lurk. They stand back and they watch. And so, but when you hit in their sweet spot, they just jump. There's a person, they'll probably hear this, that I don't think I've ever heard from before. And then the other day I asked about buying a more comfortable chair to record the podcast in. And he was just like so excited. He's like, I finally have something to contribute here. I know about this. And like, awesome. and like, here they are, And meanwhile, no one else answered really. And, and I found the one person who's like, I have real solid thoughts on this, and here's some links, and here are my thoughts, and this is what I think you should be looking at. And I think that works for everything. Here's my graph. What does it look like to you? Well, to one person, it looks like too much basil. And to another person, it looks like you're not doing well with your meals. And then you have a conversation, you find a vector of attack. And 3 days later, the person comes back and goes, oh, I did it. It's all done. Like 3 days to go from a graph that is horrifying to I did it. And meanwhile, people are going off to doctors for 6, 12, 18 months just to get their basal rates from 0.3 to 0.6.
Right.
know, and that's demoralizing. That wasted time in there, I find really frustrating. So connections to people are really important.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, on the flip side a little bit, there's so many people on social media or wherever giving advice or talking about their story. And I think there's a danger of feeling like, well, what do I have to offer? because there's so many people, once you get plugged into those resources, there's so many people who have something to say, and it can maybe feel like, well, what am I going to say that's going to be any different or make any sort of impact? But somewhere out there is someone that needs to hear what kind of chair to buy, and no one else is talking about that. And something, even if it's just a little snippet that you say, can completely change their mindset.
Well, you know what can help with there being too many voices is, and I tripped on this by mistake, but I think the podcast curated the Facebook group. And so there are people who had already been through, hundreds of hours of the podcast, and they were now far enough along the path to know what they didn't know. And that stops the extraneous people from coming in and saying something that's really not very valuable or completely formed. And so people know there's enough people here who do know. I don't need to give my half-baked answer here because I don't really know. Because when you don't really have all the answers, you're like, well, what I'm seeing is this. When someone can come in and just like break it down for you,
right?
I don't think it's something you can't build it on purpose, but you can build it with intent. Like you can start with something small with the right intent. Don't lose track of the good intent. For me, it's super simple. Like everything I do, I try to help people. Like that's it. I only have one goal. Like, is this going to help somebody? If it's not worth time.
Yeah.
And then the things that people find valuable, they kind of, they come towards, and then that grows it. And then the growth creates the whole thing. But you're limited when you do it in the real world. You're limited by bunk space or money or something like that. Whereas the thing I build is free, basically.
Yeah.
For them and for me. I mean, I don't put any great finances into it.
Right.
But it does then lack the human interaction.
Right.
Right. So if you had a wish, what would you wish for camp? That it didn't have limits as far as people, or what would you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the camping industry as a whole is sometimes viewed as, whether it's diabetes camp or not, just viewed as inaccessible for some people. Whether that's because of finances or traveling, or, if there's a camp that's close to them. And that's, I think, sometimes a tough pill for me to swallow, because I'm like, I want everyone at camp. Everybody needs this.
Yeah.
And I think just continuing, I mean, diabetes camps have great resources as far as scholarships. I'm pretty sure all the diabetes camps I know of have a baseline rule of, we will never deny anyone based on finances. Like, we'll find a way. And a lot of camps have, Lions Club members that'll drive kids to camp if their families don't have cars. So there's ways to do it, but I just don't think that it's always viewed that way. And so kind of changing that narrative and meeting the expectation as well, of camp is for everyone. Like, everybody belongs at camp, and it should be available to everyone. And everyone should feel like it's a safe space, a open space, and somewhere that they truly feel like they belong.
Yeah.
And I think, just like anything in our world today, like the camping industry has ways to go with that. But kind of like you said, with the right intent, and then meeting the actions that are actually going to meet those expectations. I don't think it's an unreasonable ask by any means.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you think this is an industry you're going to stay in, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of a weird, not weird experience, but a meaningful experience. When I was like 16, I just kind of had this moment of like, what do I want to do with my life? And I just, ever since then, I keep coming back to camp. I'm, in my master's program right now for nonprofit management, and people are like, oh, I'm going to work for Make-A-Wish, or I'm going to work for, these big nonprofit organizations. And I just keep coming back to camp. And I'm learning great tools to help me in that. But this is definitely the industry that I feel called to serve in. So I've definitely never said this out loud. It's getting to the point where there's so many episodes, I'm like, I really don't think I've ever said this. But my first foray into being helpful to people never got out of the
the planning stages. But
Okay.
I applied to be a charity, I guess a 501c3 or something like that, right? And my idea was it seems ridiculous now that I'm saying it out loud, just because it seems unattainable without an influx of money. But I wanted to start a place where newly diagnosed or lost people could come and live with their families and be brought up to speed very quickly.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right. That was my idea. I do it now online like this, right? Like through audio. But that was my first idea, is that there would be a structure somewhere that you could come and live at. And then because you'd be getting up in the morning and eating breakfast and going outside and being active or sitting down and doing school or whatever you'd be doing, you'd be living at that place for a short amount of time, in a way that you could end up having as many real life experiences around diabetes and insulin as possible, where someone would be with you the whole time to say, okay, do this, do that, do this. Because I see it now. If I followed not that you would need that, I'm just saying but if I followed your CGM and you and I were in close texting contact, like for 2 or 3 days, and you were having an issue, I'm confident we could clear the issue.
Right.
Right. And so I thought, if people were like together, and what is it they really get from that, whether you're in that texting situation or you're together, it's a sounding board from a person who very likely does know the right thing to do in this situation. And so that weeds out all of the extraneous noise in your head, like, well, maybe it's this, or maybe I should be doing that. Instead, it's just someone who goes, no, look right here. There's not enough insulin here. And then you put it in, and then you watch the good thing happen, and you learn really quickly. That was my first idea. It is not easy to have a nonprofit. There are so many things about it that scare me. And the one thing that really pushed me away from it was the board of directors. I got very scared of the idea of someone being able to override my vision. And so that I dissolved it soon after that.
Well, and I mean, I think the idea is awesome. Like, honestly, the first thing I think of is it's like a Kickstarter camp, right? Like, you get diagnosed, you go to Scott's camp for newly diagnosed, and you get kind of this simplified education, and now you're off to the races,
right.
You know?
In my mind, it's still doable online. I do bring it up to a couple of people, like imagine someone like Jenny, who's at a desk, and instead of like being with people, I don't know, imagine you could pop right onto a Zoom and say, hey, this is it. We're about to eat breakfast, blah, blah, blah. Here it is. And she could actually look at it, and you could talk for a couple of seconds and work through it. Because still, like, one of the restrictions of her job, where I've helped people, where one of the restrictions is that sometimes people don't know everything they should be telling you. And so they leave out this one really like salient detail, and you're like, I don't understand why this didn't work out. And 3 days later, they'll mention that, they had oatmeal. You're like, oh, geez, you just said carbs. You didn't say it was oatmeal. Like that kind of thing.
The evilest of all.
Right. But it's there. Like, in my maniacal part of my brain, like, I'm picturing myself in a room, like, with an infinite number of monitors, able to like bring people up to speed really quickly. But there's got to be a real way to do that. Like, there's got to be a way to take that cartoon idea and make it more of a reality. If I figure it out, I'm going to ask you, because you're going to have a master's degree by then. You'll have real thoughts.
Yeah. Pretty soon, December.
Yeah, right. And I don't even think like it should be through your healthcare system.
Yes.
Like
yes.
you should be diagnosed, and you should leave with like a voucher. Like I used to give my mom on Mother's Day when I couldn't afford a present, right? And it should tell you that when you're ready, somebody is going to walk through every aspect of your day with you until and then for a certain amount of time. And if you're really stuck, then you get moved to a different person. Like, do you know what I mean? Like maybe somebody who's, I don't know. It's there. Trust me, it's there. But
I'm all in. I love it.
The model is definitely not some nice person, well-meaning doctor sees you for 14 minutes and sends you home. That's not how it should work. So.
Well, and you had mentioned, it should be part of healthcare. And I've had people tell me like, why doesn't my insurance cover my camp tuition? And it's like, oh man, I wish it did. Right. Because there's so much value in those experiences at camp. Like I gave my first shot to myself at camp. It's like huge. Right. And a 7-year-old with type 1. And it's like the reality though of working with insurance companies to get them to cover a camp tuition. I mean, I can barely get them to cover my Dexcom supplies. Like
I am pretty certain that Arden, I mean, I know Arden will be 17 in a couple of days. I'm fairly certain she's never given herself an injection.
Oh.
She's just diabetes for 15 years.
Right.
And I don't think it's ever even come up. So,
yeah. Well, and I mean, that speaks to the change in how good technology is now too.
Yeah.
Like she's gotten to have diabetes, I guess, in this world where it was only a dream when I was first diagnosed.
Yeah.
I remember the doctors told my parents when I was diagnosed, well, there'll be a cure by the time she turns 18. I'm like, well, it's 11 years later and still waiting on that cure. But now I show my parents like my T-Slim that's connected to my Dexcom, and it's like mind blowing to them because they went from this massive insulin pump and injections to this tiny little sleek touchpad.
Right. Plus they're indigenous people to a tree community. They really have never seen stuff like this.
Right. Exactly.
I've probably given Arden 10,000 injections.
Right.
Yeah. But she's never I don't think she's ever held the syringe. I mean, I'm sure she has, but I can't remember it. You know what I mean? So
I still remember, I must have been 7.5. So it's crazy to me that I remember this moment, but I remember being in my parents' house and I was holding the poker to my meter, right? Because there was no Dexcom back then. And I was like, you can do it, Kelsey. You can do it. Like in my little 7-year-old mind, I'm like, you can poke your own finger. And I like counted to 10 and I poked my own finger and I was so proud of myself at that moment.
That's how I looked the first time I did it to myself. And I was in my 40s. I was like, this is going to hurt. I know this is going to hurt. Is this going to hurt? I don't want this to hurt. People say it doesn't hurt. And then you're like, oh, it's not bad. Yeah. And that's it. Like, and it's sort of over, but very, I love the idea of like a little kid just being like, I can do it. I can do it.
Hype yourself up.
Yeah. What, this is an unfair question that you're going to probably answer, with a disclaimer, but why do you seem so normal? And like, did you have any, I don't know how I mean this. Did you have any impediments along? I've now spoken to so many people who have diabetes, and people seem to fall in like these two specific buckets, like really burdened by it, don't really seem to mind it. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, what is that for you?
I mean, I obviously, here's the disclaimer coming right out of the chute. I've definitely had my ups and downs with diabetes. College was tough, right? Like I remember having this moment where I was like, oh, if my blood sugar doesn't ride 250 all day, I feel so much better and I do better in classes. And it's like that light bulb moment of you're like, well, that was pretty obvious. I should have figured that out, but you get distracted. And so, yeah, I've definitely had my days just like anyone else where you're like, diabetes sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. But truly, and I'm coming right back to it, like, I feel like camp was that game changer for me and I owe a lot of that to my parents because as soon as I got diagnosed, they sent me to camp. But I think I was privileged to learn early on that there were other people who had the same struggles as me, that there, were resources that I could turn to when it was tough. And I fell in love so much with that camp community that I almost became grateful to diabetes for giving me that support system. And I mean, gosh, we didn't get to have our wedding in 2020 because of COVID, but when we were planning it, 5 out of my 7 bridesmaids had type 1 and I met them all at camp. Wow. Our best man was a friend from camp. So I feel like I've gotten so much good out of having diabetes because of those camp connections, that it's kind of hard to resent it so much just because I have so much to be grateful for with it. And camp also helped me capitalize on some of the skills that diabetes brings into your life and really identify like, hey, I, had to be responsible at a young age, but now I have that responsibility skill that I've had since I was 7,
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, camp was definitely the game changer, and it helped teach me that there are parts of diabetes that I can be grateful for.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think that it's, there's something about the struggle that's valuable if the struggle doesn't kill you, you know, like that kind of
for
a thing.
Sure.
And there are some people I think who are built differently, wired differently, and that the same struggle that might enrich you could stop them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to see that how random it appears.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, it almost feels like a bit of a duty, if you will, because I fell into that camp of like feeling okay and really embracing this and using it to my advantage. It feels like I have a responsibility to work with people who don't feel that way and see if I can help be that support system that whether it changes their mind or it just supports them. Because like you said, there's 2 different kinds of people, I feel like, with type 1, and you either embrace it or you deal with it. And that doesn't always end up great.
Yeah, I feel like that too, Kelsey. If we were only 30 years closer together and I had diabetes, I could have married you. And we would have been, and of course, I can't live in a tree, though. My hands are not.
True.
I don't have the thumbs to hook onto the branches the right way, the way I'm sure you do from growing up in Oregon.
Right.
How did you meet your husband?
So speaking of things I can be grateful to diabetes for, so my husband has type 1. We actually met at diabetes camp. Shocker, I know. We met in 2016, and he actually never went to diabetes camp as a kid. But he is a basketball coach, and obviously Chris Dudley Basketball Camp is a diabetes basketball camp. And he had been applying for quite a few years to come and work the camp, and there was just never an opening. And they needed a coach one year, and he came to camp. And of course, all of our camp friends caught wind that we were maybe interested in each other, and they set up a whole camp skit for the talent show of how we were going to start dating. And oh man, things can, your camp friends really get involved in your personal life.
This one
but
time?
It worked out great.
Yeah. I felt like you were about to say this one time at diabetes camp.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. For years that he couldn't get the job, were you with somebody at that time anyway? I'm trying to imagine if he got the job sooner, but you were with somebody, so you didn't intersect well.
Oh yeah. No, the timing was just awesome. I mean, like he and I both had been dating other people until about 2 years prior to that. So we both kind of had our time to be single. And then by the time he came to camp, it was like, wow, I'm really glad that this worked out now type of a thing.
How much did having diabetes for, I don't know if you can't really speak for him. I'm already in my head like you're going to be like, I can't speak for him, but but how much does it mean for the 2 of you to have type 1, or doesn't it matter?
It's a good question, man. Scott coming in with the hard hitters.
Like if he got cured tomorrow, would you be like, oh, I don't even like him as much now?
No, I mean, it's interesting because we both have had very different experiences with type 1. I feel like we're both in that camp of like accepting it and embracing it. But like we both have very different management styles. I feel like now that we're married, we're kind of getting on more of the same page with that. But like I think it definitely helps, but it's never been like a forefront of our relationship.
You weren't looking for a guy with type 1 to get married to?
No,
okay.
No.
Okay, so you just said something. I'm going to pin you down on it now. You both have different styles. Whose style is better?
Different parts of different. Like when I first met him, he might hate me for saying this, but he'll be fine.
Don't worry. If you stay married long enough, he'll hate you one way or the other. So let's just get to it.
Exactly. When I first met him, he was like, he didn't have a or no, he had a CGM, but it was the Medtronic one. And it was old enough that he had to calibrate it 3 times a day. And he said, he held out his finger and he was like, I poke on this side of my thumb in the morning and the top is lunch and the side is dinner. And then I move on the next day to my pointer finger. And I was just looking at him like, what are you talking about? Like but he's also a math teacher, right? So he's got that like logical, very organized mind that I don't have. And I joke with him. I'm like, so do you change your Lancet every day too? Because this isn't going to work if you do that.
Well, you know, a math teacher and a camp counselor, one day you guys will amass tens of dollars in your savings account. And
yeah, tell me about
it. So there's something there too, right? Like that feeling of helping people. He must have that as well if he's a teacher.
Yeah, for sure. Teacher, and he coaches football and basketball. So we definitely both have, I think that more than like, obviously we both have diabetes, which is a huge thing to have in common. But I think even more than that, it was you're here at camp to help people just like I am. You love working with kids in your daily life, just like I do.
Right.
And it both just happened to be because of diabetes that we met. So
that's very nice. It really is kind of lovely and sweet. But you guys got married during COVID? What did that mean? Did you do it over Zoom from different bedrooms, or how did you?
No. So our wedding was planned for May 23rd and we had this like 250 person wedding at camp. It was going to be at camp because that's where we met.
Right.
And we had it pretty much all planned. And then like 3 weeks before COVID was like still around and we're like, well, crap, what do we do? So we had to just pivot, the word of 2020. And we actually did a 10-person wedding because that was the max people that you were allowed to have gather at that point. And it was just our immediate families. My brother married us. His sister was there, who was going to be one of my bridesmaids, and then our parents. And we did it at my parents' house in the middle of the woods.
Well, there's nowhere else to go.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
no roads or anything or buildings. So.
Yeah. And so it was a wonderful wedding.
Nice.
It was still at that point in COVID where people didn't really know like what to do, how careful to be. Like we didn't hug. I mean, Derek and I hugged, but like we didn't hug our
you
parents.
Did, Kelsey.
But
we didn't hug. You didn't hug your mom on your wedding day or your dad?
No. Oh. And my parents were like very concerned about it, as were all of us. And with Derek and I both having type 1, we were like, at that point, like no one knew what was going to make it worse or better or safer. Or
this sweet story turns into a weird headline 7 days later.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And we were so nervous at that point. Like, our parents are older and oh gosh, it could have, it was in that, like those few months where it was like, what's going on? What is COVID?
Well, when does camp come back? When's the next time Chris is running a camp?
So we're doing, unfortunately this year, we have to do virtual camp again. Oregon just lifted a bunch of restrictions, but being a diabetes camp, we need a lot of prep time and doctors to hire and nurses to hire. And so we're doing virtual camp end of this month. And we're super excited. I will tell you, I thought the kids would be like, nope, everything's opened up. Never mind. I don't want to do virtual camp, but I keep getting emails from parents about how excited they are. And we just shipped off 75 boxes of like fun swag and gifts for them. So we're doing that this year. And then next July will be, knock on wood, fingers crossed, back on the courts in Vernonia, Oregon, in the middle of the woods.
That would be that's really cool. Although I guess at virtual camp, you can't like meet a girl and kiss her behind a cabin or something like that. Which that's gotta be rampant. How old are these kids?
They are 10 through 17.
Oh, so some of them maybe.
Some of them maybe.
Yeah.
I keep a close eye though.
A lot a lot of adults I know, some of their best stories start with when I was in camp. And boy. And I don't mean best stories like they learned math. So
oh boy.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's that's all kind of part of it. Where do you fall on the? I mean, the answer is obvious here, but I'm asking you literally because I saw somebody post this on Facebook this morning. I saw a young 22-year-old, I think, guy say that he was always family oriented and then was diagnosed at around this age and now is scared to have a family. And are you scared to have a family?
I'm not. I wouldn't say my husband or I are. And I think part of that is we just are, that's something that both of us have always wanted, is to have kids. The other part of it is, and this might come off odd to some people, and maybe this is just how I justify it to myself. But I feel like, and even having a husband, I've always thought this, but having a husband with type 1 obviously increases the odds of our kids having type 1. But I guess my philosophy is, well, if they have type 1, at least they'll be in a family that gets it, knows how to manage it, and has like the resources. Like if my kids get to go to diabetes camp someday, I know they're going to be fine. And so at least, God forbid they get type 1, but at least we'll know the signs to catch it early, and we'll have all the tools to make it as good of an experience as possible. Yeah. So
no, I think there are a number of different ways to think about it, and I don't find one to be any more or less viable than the other. And I've heard a lot of people say what you just said, and I think it's comforting to hear what you just said, honestly.
Well, and I mean, as much as there's extra odds that they will get type 1, I have a couple other friends who both parents have type 1 and their kids don't. Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, it could not happen.
I just think that trying to control, I don't know, randomness is a weird decision to make. Like if you think you'd be so overwhelmed if your child had type 1, no matter how that would overwhelm you with need to do something or guilt or whatever it would be I also think it's possibly different for people who are having a different time, like managing. Like if you're having a reasonable time managing, it seems more manageable. Right. But if I also I like it when people know their limitations too, and they say, this would overwhelm me. This isn't something I should do.
Absolutely.
But for November, I'm talking out of order in the timeline, but there'll be an episode in November of from a woman who, adopted children. They wanted children, couldn't have children, adopted children. And then one of the children ends up with type 1 diabetes and the other one ends up with something else. Just this through this randomness. And
no way.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's an example, right? Like you don't get to decide how it works out.
Right.
So you're either in to make a family and you're in for whatever comes next, or that's not for you. And I think either way is reasonable. Just, I think knowing that is probably the ultimate truth is to me, see how I'm so willing to just speak like Kelsey, like what I think is the exact right thing. But to me, that's the ultimate truth. Like you're not going to get a clean, like go the whole time. There's nobody I know who doesn't have something going on. If it's not health, then it's money. And if it's not money, then it's bad family situations. If it's not, and the real unlucky people get multiples of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, but absolutely.
I don't think there's anyone walking around who wakes up in the morning and is like, everything's perfect.
Right.
I'll just go about my perfect day and do my perfect things. And if people are expecting that out of parenthood, I mean, from my perspective, you're making a huge mistake.
Right. Yeah.
So, are you going to make the babies, or are you like, what's the play? Because I mean, you're not old, Kelsey, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't want to be at like a graduation when you're 65, going like,
right?
That's Billy.
No, I mean, I definitely think the plan is to try naturally, and I mean, if for some reason that doesn't work, like you mentioned, the person who adopted, I met this family through camp one year that they had a daughter with type 1, and then they had not found this girl, but like someone had come to them and said, here's this girl, and she also has type 1, and we know you know how to manage it, and she needs a family. And they were like, cool, let's have 2 kids with type 1. Like, come on in. And I just thought that was so cool. So that's something that I would definitely consider as well.
Right. There's somebody's been on the show who I think does. Oh my God, the word just left my head. Where's the word? Damn it, Kelsey, where's the word? When you're a person and then a kid comes and lives with you for a little while with the idea.
Foster?
Thank you. Jeez. Wow, that was terrible. Yeah, there's a person that's been on who fosters kids with type 1.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's difficult, but I think rewarding and valuable. Listen, I'm adopted. If somebody didn't give me up for adoption when they thought they couldn't take care of me, you and I are not having this conversation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, people need to find whatever path works for them. But, there's a lot of good things that can come from making a family. So to that person.
And the person you mentioned that fosters, do they have type 1 themselves?
They do.
See, I mean, how cool is that for those kids, right? Like, you come from foster care where you're probably not meeting many other people with type 1. And now you get a safe home and someone that gets it, right? Like, that just takes so much burden off those kids.
If I remember the example right, it was difficult in the beginning, but a really swift change for the kid,
Mm-hmm.
So that's really cool. All right. So go adopt a bunch of babies. Just make sure they can hang in a tree and,
then we're good.
forage on the ground for nuts and mushrooms and things like that grow in where do you really live? Is it like, I'm sure it's like a metropolis or something like that, or?
So I live in Albany, which is like an hour south of Portland.
I feel like you stole that name from New York. Isn't Albany?
Yeah, probably.
By the time they got out west, they were out of names.
Yeah, exactly. They just had to start copying and pasting.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's definitely green here, but I'm in like a little suburb area.
Right. But you're high all the time.
No, I am not. Blood sugar wise, maybe.
Oh my God. So there you go. That's what I know about Albany: weed and trees. And I might be wrong about all of it.
Right.
So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you hoped that we would have? I find myself, before you answer that question, you have so many different interesting perspectives that I jumped around a lot trying to dig into all of your areas of expertise. But I don't know if did you know you'd be good on the podcast?
I mean, not really. Oh. I knew after I talked with you and we talked with Chris, I was like, you're just really easy to talk to. And I love the questions that you ask. Cool. And so I was like, I'm sure he'll ask questions that I can dig deep for a good answer.
Does it make you feel uncomfortable or comfortable to know that as I sat in this chair, I was like, I don't know who I'm talking to today. And then I looked up and I was like, Kelsey, I think that's the Chris Dudley girl.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And I love that you can just jump on with anyone and have a conversation about this stuff that speaks to your expertise in the podcast realm.
Yeah, I find people so interesting. I have so many questions that I don't get to ask. Like, if I asked all the questions I was thinking, every episode would be 3 hours. I want to ask you more probing questions about camp. Like, what would you say to somebody who doesn't like camp? Like, it's not for everybody, right?
I love that question.
What do you?
Can I answer that question?
Well, listen, I'll preface it by telling you this. For years after Arden was diagnosed, we were like, there's a really popular diabetes camp, and she was like, no. Like, yeah. But that's not Arden's vibe. It's not just diabetes. Like, you couldn't send Arden to lollipop camp. She'd be like, I'm not up for that. Like, so I don't even know what it is. Something about being outdoors that much. Maybe she's particular about the people she hangs out with.
Yeah.
I don't know, but what do you say to people when, I'm assuming people show up at their door, the parents are like super excited for camp, and the kid gets out of the car and you're like, the kid doesn't look very excited. Like, what do you
yeah. So I love this question because those kids that show up at camp and you can just tell they don't want to be there, whether they're like bawling their eyes out or they're just like not talking to anyone. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you're my guy. Like, I'm going to go talk to you. But like you said, it's not for everyone, and that's okay. Right. Like, I think the biggest thing is for people to recognize is that not all camps are the same. So like riding on insulin, awesome ski and snowboard camp, looks very different than Gales Creek, where you are out in the woods and hanging out in cabins and going on hikes and doing arts and crafts. Similarly, like Chris Dudley basketball camp, completely different, right? You're playing basketball all day. So I know kids that hated other camps, but love Dudley camp because they love basketball and it's their interest is there. And so I think what I would say to those families or those kids is to not rule out all camps just because you're not interested in one, and to really look into what camp entails, because there is kind of that connotation of, oh, well, summer camp, you're going to be out in the middle of the woods. You're not going to have, running water or what have you. But it's so different for every other camp. Riding on Insulin is at the ski lodge. It's usually just a day camp. But you still get those camp vibes of connecting and doing something that you're interested in or trying something new with people who understand diabetes. Yeah. And I think, riding on Insulin, I think you can get just as much out of it as you do from a day overnight in a traditional summer camp. So I think that would be my first bit of advice for people who are like, ooh, camp. But my other bit of advice would to be just to try it. Right. And that's tough for some kids. But I've seen so many kids that just do not want to be at camp. And then they leave on Friday crying because they don't want to leave camp. Right. So I think there's a lot of, if you can get your kid to just try it, then there's a lot of development. And the camper or the counselors and the staff are so well trained. Like, we know there's kids coming in who don't want to be there. Like, we're ready for those guys.
Right.
And gals. But yeah, I think it's worth trying it. And if you don't like it, that's okay. There's other, like the podcast or the diabetes online community. There's other ways of support and other ways of meeting people that you can connect with that are just as powerful. But I think it's worth a shot if you can give it a try.
It's cool that you've got it thought through like that. Because I know personally from the podcast that when you have this feeling that there's this thing and you've already made it and it exists and you've seen it do so much good things for so many good things for so many people. And then somebody says, well, I don't have time to listen. Or, and you're like, oh, like it crushes you at first. And then you realize it's just not going to be for everybody.
Right.
And,
and nothing ever is.
Right. It's difficult though, once you've put so much effort into something for someone to go camp. Ew. And you're like, wait, no. I got married a guy from camp. Like you start, you're like, and the same thing, somebody will post a graph. They clearly don't understand a lot of what they're doing. Right. And I'm like, I think if you listen to these 3 episodes, it would clarify it. And sometimes every once in a while, someone will respond, I don't have time for that. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do then. Like I already gave the world a thing. This is it. Yeah. Like if you want it, go use it. If you don't want it, I don't know what to do for you. Like, like I can't come to your house. Although, although there are times where you think like, I bet you I could. Like, I wish I could roll up to somebody's house and just like help and then roll.
Like if I could just get an hour with them, like
maybe if we get to 10 million downloads, I'll give myself away. That can't be legal, but we'll figure it out.
We'll do a raffle.
Yeah. I actually tried to do that once for one of the sponsors. And the legal aspect of it did not like the idea. So
gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah, it didn't work out, but I had that idea. I'll tell you off the air. I have so many like thoughts that I don't get to share on here, but if you can you hold on for a second after we say goodbye? I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely.
Do you think people are pissed right now that they're not going to hear what the next question is?
Yeah, they're like, wait a second.
Yeah, well, guess what, everybody? Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. And if you've enjoyed this podcast or any of the other ones and you'd like to say thank you, It's super easy to do that. You can just go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and fill out the survey. All right, guys, there's not going to be any hijinks at the end here. I'm completely beat. I just got done interviewing Shacey Petrovic and Trang Lai from Omnipod. They announced the FDA clearance of the Omnipod 5 right on the Juicebox podcast, and I'm beat from that still. It was very exciting. Oh, it's in episode 620, the one right before this, if you're interested. Because, yeah, I mean, that thing everybody's been waiting for, the Omnipod 5, the FDA just said, go. So here we go. There are tons of details in that episode. Go check it out. I'm super excited for Arden to try Omnipod 5. I am quite certain many of you are as well. Actually, I have a link. Omnipod.com/juicebox5 if you want to get on the list, if the interest list. They're keeping a list of people who are interested because there's going to be a limited market release for the next, I don't know how long. They didn't say exactly, but it's, again, in the episode. I'm getting away from myself here. Anyway, if you want to let the good people at Omnipod know you're interested in the Omnipod 5, their new algorithm-based insulin pump, go to omnipod.com/juicebox5. It's just the number 5. Usually you guys go to omnipod.com/juicebox. Right now, if you want to ask about that, it's Juicebox 5. Honestly, I think my other link gets there too. I'll look real quick. Like I said, there wasn't going to be hijinks, and now I'm omnipod.com/juicebox. No 5. Scrolling. Go to page 2 of 2. Scroll. No, that's not it. Huh. Interesting. Get started. No. I guess you need the 5. For now. I'm going to talk to somebody. Get it all put on one page for you. For now, omnipod.com, Juicebox 5. Go get on the list. Tell them, like, I'm interested. The interested list. I'm sure there's another name for it, but that escapes me right now. Anyway, let me button this up. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. I did it. We're done. I gotta go to bed.